My golden child sister slept with my husband and got pregnant. My parents sided with her and now demand I support their new family financially. The next time we met in court, but what I did next made them turn pale. My name is Eleanor, and my story is about family. About what it means to be the responsible one, and what happens when you finally stop taking the blame. From the moment I was old enough to understand words like responsible and disappointment, I knew which one belonged to me. I was the older daughter, the standard bearer. If anything went wrong in our quiet, suburban house, the finger of blame had a funny way of swiveling in my direction first. It was like a magnetic pull, and I was the North Pole of every problem. Meanwhile, my younger sister Chelsea seemed to float through life with a halo only my parents could see. Chelsea was 3 years younger than me, but that small gap felt like an entire universe. She was the golden child, the one whose mistakes were seen as charming quirks, whose carelessness was just a sign of a free spirit, as my mother liked to say. I remember one afternoon when I was about 10. Mom had this porcelain vase she adored, a delicate thing with painted bluebirds that sat on the mantelpiece. I was in the living room reading a book, and Chelsea was chasing our cat around, giggling. I told her to be careful, but she just laughed. A moment later, there was a crash. The vase was in 100 pieces on the floor. When my mother walked in, her face fell. Chelsea immediately burst into tears. I opened my mouth to explain, but my father walked in right behind my mother, took one look at the scene, me, standing frozen, and Chelsea, sobbing on the floor, and his gaze hardened on me. "Eleanor," he said, his voice laced with that familiar disappointment. "You're the older sister. You should have been watching her. You know better." I was grounded for 2 weeks. Chelsea got ice cream to calm her nerves. I tried to argue, to explain that I was just reading, but it was useless. Their minds were made up. I was the responsible one, so the failure of responsibility had to be mine. It was a perfect, simple equation that defined my childhood. If we both left dirty dishes in the sink, I was the one who got the lecture about hygiene and setting an example. Chelsea got a soft sigh and a gentle reminder about being more mindful. Sometimes, I honestly wondered if we were living in 2 different households that just happened to share the same address. But the night that still burns in my memory, the one that really cemented our roles for good, happened when I was 16. Chelsea was 13. We'd both snuck out to a party at a senior's house, the kind of party you feel so grown up just for being invited to. We huddled in my bathroom mirror beforehand, giggling as we lined our eyes with clumsy, thick eyeliner. We came home at 1 a.m, convinced we were masters of stealth. But as we tiptoed up the walkway, the porch light flicked on, and there was Dad, silhouetted in the doorway, his arms crossed. My heart dropped into my stomach. He sent Chelsea inside with a tired shake of his head and a muttered, "We'll talk about making better choices tomorrow." But me? He looked at me as if I'd personally betrayed him. I was grounded for a month. No phone, no friends, nothing. That night, I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to swallow the bitterness that was rising in my throat like acid. It was the first time I truly understood. In my family, my mistakes were written in permanent ink, while Chelsea's were erasable smudges. So, I leaned into the label they gave me. If I was destined to be the responsible one, then I would be the best damn responsible one they had ever seen. I poured myself into books, into exams, into building a version of myself that was so competent, so successful, that no one could ignore or dismiss me. I graduated high school with honors, won a partial scholarship to a decent college, and still picked up shifts at a campus bookstore to cover what the scholarship didn't. My parents were proud, I suppose, but in a distant, expected kind of way. It was just Eleanor doing what Eleanor was supposed to do. During those lonely, stressful college years, I found an unlikely ally, Aunt Beatrice. She was my father's aunt, a sharp-witted woman in her late 70s who lived about 20 minutes from my campus. She had a small, tidy house that always smelled of old books and lemon polish. I started visiting her on Sundays, mostly out of a sense of duty at first, but it quickly became the one part of my week I looked forward to. Unlike my parents, Aunt Beatrice never made me feel like I was in a competition I was unknowingly losing. She saw me. I'd carry her groceries in from the car, and she'd pat my hand, her skin as soft as worn paper, and murmur, "You're the only one who bothers to visit, you know. Don't think I don't notice." One afternoon, I was sitting in her floral armchair, stressed out of my mind about an upcoming organic chemistry exam. I was complaining that I'd probably only get a B, and how my parents would compare it to Chelsea, who could fail a class and still get a pat on the back for trying. I expected a typical "just do your best" lecture. But Aunt Beatrice just watched me for a long moment, her eyes, still so bright beneath her silver hair, full of a softness I rarely saw. "Let me tell you something, Eleanor," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Your parents, they love you. But they see Chelsea as a project. Someone who needs fixing. They see you as the finished product. They take you for granted because you've never given them a reason not to." I just stared at her, my throat tight. "I like spending time with you, Auntie," I whispered, finally saying it out loud. "You don't compare me to Chelsea." She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "That's because you don't need to be compared," she said firmly. "You're enough, just as you are." Her words, they were like a bandage on a wound no one else had ever bothered to see. In that small, quiet living room, for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. I wasn't just the responsible daughter or the overachieving student. I was just Eleanor. And that was enough. While I was juggling classes and a part-time job, trying to build a future, Chelsea drifted. She dropped out of high school in her senior year, scraping by with a GED a year later. Her time was filled with a rotating cast of boyfriends who changed as quickly as the seasons. My parents worried, sure, but their worry was always sugar-coated with excuses. "She's just finding herself," Mom would say with a sigh. "She's more of a free spirit than you, Eleanor." A free spirit. That's what they called having no direction, no ambition, and no regard for anyone but herself. The real crisis hit when Chelsea turned 18. She vanished overnight with a guy named Shane. He had a beat-up motorcycle, a worn leather jacket, and a job so flexible that no one could ever pin down what he actually did. One day he was a bartender, the next a roadie for some band no one had ever heard of. My parents fell apart. It was the most animated I had ever seen them. Mom cried until her voice went hoarse. Dad walked around the house like a man who had lost a limb, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and drawn. They called hospitals, filed a missing persons report, and even hired a private investigator. I came home from college on weekends to a house thick with grief and fear. And all I could think was, she finally did it. She finally made herself the absolute center of their universe. Then, 3 months later, just as suddenly as she had disappeared, Chelsea strolled back into the house as if she'd just gone out for groceries. She sat down at the dinner table, casually spooning mashed potatoes onto her plate while my mother stroked her hair, sobbing with relief. "Shane was a jerk," she explained with a shrug. "So, I left him. And that was it." That was the entire explanation for 3 months of agony. There were no consequences, no reckoning for the sleepless nights and the thousands of dollars they'd spent searching for her. My parents were so overjoyed to have their golden child back that they clung to her as though nothing had happened. I sat at that table, watching them, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and flip the entire table over. I wanted to ask them why my mistake of coming home late from a party at 16 earned me a month of imprisonment, while her mistake of disappearing with a stranger for 3 months earned her a welcome home party. I wanted to ask why my mistakes were carved in stone, while hers were written in sand, ready to be washed away by the next tide of their affection. But I kept my mouth shut. Because I already knew the answer. In their eyes, I was the strong one. I could handle it. Chelsea was the fragile one. She had to be protected. The phone call came during my final year of college. I was in the library, hunched over a textbook, a yellow highlighter hovering over a page I would never remember reading. It was my dad. His voice was flat when he told me Aunt Beatrice had passed away quietly in her sleep. I just sat there, frozen. The muted sounds of the library, the rustle of pages, the soft coughs, faded into a dull roar in my ears. The one person who had ever made me feel truly seen, truly valued, was gone. It felt like a door had slammed shut on the only place I'd ever felt unconditionally welcome. The shock only deepened a week later, after the funeral, when I met with her lawyer. He was a kind, older gentleman who spoke in a soft, measured tone. He explained that Aunt Beatrice had updated her will a year prior. She had left everything, her modest house, her savings, her carefully kept accounts, to me. The total inheritance was about $150,000. When I told my mother over the phone, her reaction wasn't grief for her aunt or happiness for me. It was pure, unadulterated suspicion. There was a long silence, and then she asked, her voice thin and tight, "She left it all to you?" "Yes," I whispered, my throat still tight with grief. "The lawyer said she made the changes last year." Another pause. Then she sighed, a sound heavy with implication. "Well," she said, and her tone wasn't one of admiration. It was an accusation. "You were always her favorite." As if I'd somehow manipulated a sweet old woman into writing me a check. The truth was much simpler. I had been there. I had visited, I had listened, I had cared. They had barely shown up except for holidays. When Chelsea found out, her jealousy was a sharp, ugly thing. She didn't bother to hide it. I was visiting home a few weeks later, and she cornered me in the kitchen. "That's so unfair," she snapped, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You get a college degree and now a pile of money. What about me?" Years of bitterness clawed their way out of me before I could stop them. "What about you, Chelsea?" I shot back, my voice shaking. "You had the same chances I did. You had parents who would have paid for anything you wanted. You just didn't take them." Her face twisted into a sneer. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" Before I could answer, Dad cut in from the doorway. "Girls, that's enough," he said, his voice firm. Then he looked at me. "Eleanor, don't be so harsh. Your sister is just trying to figure things out." It was always the same. Chelsea was figuring things out. I was just supposed to have it all together. I drove back to campus that night, my hands gripping the steering wheel. But this time, something was different. I wasn't just swallowing bitterness. I was feeling a spark of resolve. Aunt Beatrice had left me more than money, she had left me a choice. I found a note she'd once tucked into a book she gave me. Her elegant handwriting looped across the page. "Don't let anyone else decide your future, Eleanor. Trust yourself." That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to let this gift be a down payment on a house my parents approved of. I was going to bet on myself. For months, I'd been sketching out a business plan for a small consulting service to help local businesses streamline their operations. The inheritance was my chance to make it real. When I told my parents my plan, they looked horrified. "That money could be a down payment on a house, Eleanor," my mother said, her brow furrowed with worry. "Or you could save it for your future," Dad added, his tone implying my plan was the most reckless thing he'd ever heard. "Starting a business is too risky." I looked at them, my back straight, my voice steady. "I've done the research. I know what I'm doing." They exchanged that familiar look, the one that was half pity, half disapproval. But this time, they couldn't stop me. It wasn't their decision to make. The first year was brutal. It was 18-hour days fueled by cheap coffee, stacks of rejections, and meals eaten out of takeout boxes while I was hunched over spreadsheets on my tiny apartment floor. There were nights I cried into my pillow, convinced I'd made a colossal mistake and that my parents were right all along. But I kept going, driven by Aunt Beatrice's memory and a desperate need to prove everyone wrong. Slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. A small bakery became my first client. Then a local garage. By the end of the second year, I had my first employee and a tiny office that wasn't also my bedroom. By year 5, I had a real office, a small, dedicated team, and a reputation for being one of the best consultants in the city. That's when I met Graham. He worked in the IT department of one of my client companies, tall, steady-eyed, with a quiet wit that caught me off guard during project meetings. After weeks of professional interactions, he caught me in the hallway one afternoon. "I've been working up the courage for weeks to ask you this," he admitted, a slight blush creeping up his neck. "Would you want to get coffee sometime?" I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "And here I thought you were just really enthusiastic about network security." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my shoulders unclench for the first time in what felt like years. After so long focusing only on survival and success, it felt strange and wonderful to be seen as more than just a business owner, more than just the responsible one. With Graham, I could just be Eleanor. I could breathe. 2 years later, he knelt on one knee on a windy cliffside overlooking the coast and asked me to marry him. The wedding was a beautiful, hazy blur of autumn leaves and happy tears. For the first time, I felt like the universe was finally balancing its scales in my favor. Not long after, a big project came up that required Graham to travel constantly. We both hated it. Around the same time, my own company was expanding, and I desperately needed an operations director. One evening, Graham made a suggestion. "What if I came to work for you?" he said carefully. "You need someone to handle operations." "That's my wheelhouse. We'd be building something together, side by side." I was hesitant. Mixing business with marriage felt like walking a tightrope in a storm. But he was competent, I trusted him, and a part of me, the part that had been carrying everything alone for so long, yearned for a true partner. So, I agreed. And for a while, it was perfect. The company thrived, and so did we. Our perfect life came to a screeching halt with a late-night phone call. It was my mother, her voice tight with a manufactured urgency. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you about Chelsea," she began. "She's back home. That relationship she was in, it ended badly. She needs help, honey. She needs stability." I closed my eyes, pressing my thumb against my temple. Here we go again. Mom, I can't be her safety net every time she makes a bad decision. "She needs a job," Mom pushed, her voice starting to crack with emotion. "You have a successful business. Surely there's something she could do there. A simple admin role, anything. Family helps family." The memory of Chelsea's sneer after Aunt Beatrice's will reading burned in my mind. "She's never kept a job for more than 3 months," I said flatly. "I can't risk my company, my employees' livelihoods, on her." "Just meet with her," Mom pleaded, and then she delivered the killing blow. "Please, Eleanor. She's changed, I promise. Aunt Beatrice would have wanted you to help." My resolve crumbled. Using Aunt Beatrice's name felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't want to open. I vented to Graham later that night, expecting him to back me up, but he surprised me. "Maybe you should give her a chance," he said gently, placing a hand on my arm. "Family is important. People can change." His words unsettled me more than my mother's. If even Graham, my logical, steady husband, thought Chelsea deserved another chance, maybe I was the one being unreasonable. And so, against every screaming instinct in my body, I agreed. When Chelsea walked into my office a few days later, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the messy ponytails and wrinkled band t-shirts. She wore a tailored blazer, her hair was styled, her makeup minimal and professional. She sat across from me, her back straight, and slid a folder across my desk. Inside was a certificate from a year-long business administration program. "I know I have every reason to doubt me," she said, her voice steady and soft. "But I've been working hard. I needed to prove to myself, and to you, that I'm serious about changing." I stared at the paper. The Chelsea I knew barely had the patience to finish a movie, let alone a year-long course. Part of me felt a flicker of hope. What if she really had changed? What if this was the start of a real relationship between us? So I gave in. 3-month probation, I said sternly. That's all I can promise. Her face lit up with a relief that looked so genuine, it almost erased my doubts. Thank you, Eleanor, she said, her eyes shining. I won't let you down. To make things as objective as possible, I placed Chelsea in the operations department, directly under Graham's supervision. It seemed like the safest bet. He was fair, professional, and he'd see through any laziness immediately. To my genuine surprise, the first few weeks passed without a single incident. Chelsea showed up early and stayed late. She was charming on the phone with clients, efficient with her tasks, and eager to learn. More than once, Graham would come home from work and say, "You know, she's actually really good with people. The clients love her." I'd force a smile, but each compliment felt like a small, tight knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't the sister I knew, and while I should have been happy, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching an actress in a very convincing play. As weeks turned into months, I had to travel more for work, scouting new expansion opportunities. Each time I returned, I found Chelsea more seamlessly woven into the fabric of my company. Employees I had hired and mentored now chatted easily with her in the break room. Graham praised her efficiency in team meetings. I started to feel like a visitor in my own creation. The unease grew into a cold, sharp-edged suspicion one evening at a small company gathering we hosted at our house. I was in the kitchen getting more drinks when I looked out onto the patio. I saw Graham and Chelsea standing close together by the fire pit, laughing at some inside joke. As I watched, their heads turned toward each other, their faces just a little too close, their body language a little too familiar. A strange, prickling sensation crawled up my skin. "You're being paranoid," I told myself, shaking it off. "You wanted them to get along." I walked out to join them, a bright smile fixed on my face. But when I stepped into the circle of light from the fire, I saw it. Just for a split second, as Chelsea looked up at me, her own smile faltered. It was like a curtain slipping, revealing a flicker of something else, annoyance? Guilt, before it was yanked back into place. My own smile felt frozen on my face. Something was wrong. My instincts, the ones I had ignored when I hired her, were now screaming at me. That gut feeling grew heavier when Warren, our head of security, started acting strange. Warren had been with me from the early days. He was a retired police officer with a dry wit and an unwavering loyalty that I treasured. But now, he avoided my eyes in meetings and would cut conversations short whenever I approached. He started looking at me with an expression I couldn't place. It looked like pity. One night, long after everyone else had gone home, I called him into my office and closed the door. "Warren," I said, leaning forward on my desk. "Something's bothering you. I can see it. Please, just tell me what it is." He shifted in his chair, looking deeply uncomfortable. He hesitated for a long moment, then finally met my eyes. "Ms. Wynne." "Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "You need to see something from the security footage." A chill crept up my spine like a spider. "Show me." He pulled out his tablet, his fingers seeming to tremble slightly as he tapped the screen. He handed it to me without a word. The screen lit up with a familiar view, the main hallway outside the conference rooms, time-stamped from 2 weeks prior. And then I saw them. Graham and Chelsea, walking side by side, laughing. His hand casually brushed against hers. Her face tilted up toward his. And then, my world stopped. They were kissing. Not a peck. A deep, passionate kiss, pressed up against the wall of the company I had built from nothing. Then they slipped into the adjacent storage room, and the camera's view was empty again. My mouth went dry. My vision swam. I couldn't breathe. My fingers felt numb as Warren, his face grim, swiped to another clip. Different day, different corner of the office. Same betrayal. He swiped again. And again. It was a highlight reel of my husband and my sister, under my roof, in my company, destroying my life, clip by devastating clip. How long? The question came out as a strangled whisper I barely recognized as my own. Warren's voice was heavy with sorrow. I checked the archives. At least 3 months, he said quietly. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. The tablet felt like it was burning my hands. All those late nights Graham claimed to be working, all those glowing reports about Chelsea's performance, it was all a lie. My husband and my sister. The world tilted beneath me, and I felt myself free-falling into a black, empty space. I drove home in a complete haze. I don't remember the traffic or the route. All I remember is gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned bone white, the skin stretched thin over them. Every stoplight, every mile marker, was just another moment for the images to replay in my mind on a torturous loop. Graham's hand on the small of Chelsea's back, Chelsea tilting her head up to look at him with an expression of adoration she had never, ever given me. When I walked through the front door, the smell of garlic and tomatoes hit me. Graham was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio as he stirred a pot of pasta sauce. The sheer, blissful domesticity of the scene made bile rise in my throat. Hey, you're home early, he said with that easy, familiar smile that I now knew was a complete lie. I didn't answer. I just walked over to him, pulled out my phone, and pressed play on the first video Warren had sent me. I turned the volume all the way up. The sound of their shared laughter filled our kitchen, bouncing off the clean countertops and stainless steel appliances. Graham froze, his hand still holding the wooden spoon mid-stir. His eyes locked on the tiny screen, and every ounce of color drained from his face. The charming smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure panic. Eleanor. He stammered, his voice suddenly weak. Lisa, I can explain. Explain what? My voice trembled, a terrifying cocktail of fury and heartbreak. Explain how you've been sleeping with my sister in the hallways of my company? The company that pays your salary? He set the spoon down with a clatter and reached for me. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Don't you dare touch me, I snarled, stepping back as if his hands were on fire. He opened his mouth again, probably to spin another web of lies, but I cut him off. A raw, guttural scream tore its way out of my throat, so loud and full of pain that my throat burned. It was the sound of years of betrayal, of being second best, of trusting the wrong people, all erupting at once. His mouth snapped shut. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and for the first time, he saw that there were no more chances. No more explanations. Pack your things, I said, my voice eerily calm after the scream. And get out. You're done here. Both of you. You're fired. He just stared at me for a moment, his lips parted. Then, he closed them, gave a single, defeated nod, and turned to walk upstairs. He knew. There was no room left to argue. That night, I sat at my desk, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type, and I drafted their termination papers. The cruelest irony was signing my own husband's name on the line that officially ended his career at my company. The next day, my phone started ringing off the hook. It was my mother. I ignored her calls, but she was relentless, calling again and again until I finally answered, my patience worn to a thread. What is going on, Eleanor? She demanded, no hello, no preamble. Graham's at our house with a suitcase. Chelsea won't stop crying. You need to come over here right now and fix this. Fix this. The audacity of it almost made me laugh, a hysterical, broken laugh. Did you know? I asked quietly, the question hanging in the air between us. Her silence was my answer. It said everything. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, it was exactly as I'd pictured. They were all there, waiting for me in the living room, my mother, my father, Chelsea, and Graham. The 4 people who should have been my foundation now looked like a panel of strangers waiting to ambush me. Without saying a word, I walked over to their large-screen TV, connected my phone, and played one of the videos. The screen lit up with the image of Graham and Chelsea kissing passionately, her hand tangled in his hair. My mother gasped theatrically. My father stared at the floor, refusing to look at the screen. Chelsea covered her face and began to sob loudly. "How could you all betray me like this?" My voice cracked on the last word. For a moment, the room was heavy with what I thought was guilt. But I was wrong. It was just strategy. My mother recovered first, her expression hardening. "Eleanor, nobody meant to hurt you," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "These things happen. People fall in love unexpectedly." Chelsea lifted her tear-streaked face, and in a voice trembling with practiced fragility, she whispered, "We didn't want it to happen. We couldn't stop it. Graham and I, we're in love." Graham reached over and took her hand, a gesture of solidarity that made my stomach churn. And then, Chelsea delivered the line that split my world in two. "I'm pregnant." The air left my lungs. "What?" "Almost 4 weeks," she whispered, her free hand resting delicately on her stomach. "We were going to tell you." I staggered back as if she had physically struck me. But then Graham leaned forward, his tone suddenly cold and calculating. "You can't fire us without cause, Eleanor. That's illegal. We'll sue you." My father finally spoke up, his voice sharp with judgment. "You're overreacting, Eleanor. Nobody should lose their livelihood over this." Chelsea, seeing her advantage, pressed on, her tears drying into calculation. "I am under enormous stress because of you," she said, her chin lifting defiantly. "My doctor says the baby could be at risk. I have medical documentation." And that's when they laid out their plan. They were getting married as soon as our divorce was finalized. They demanded I reinstate them both immediately. "She needs stability, Eleanor," my mother insisted. "Or what?" I asked, my voice flat. "Or we'll file a lawsuit tomorrow," Graham said coldly. "Wrongful termination, emotional distress, endangerment of an unborn child. How do you think your clients will react to those headlines?" I looked at their faces. My mother, who told me to protect my sister. My father, who lectured me about duty. My husband, who vowed fidelity. My sister, who had taken everything. And in that moment, standing completely alone against the 4 people who should have been my foundation, I walked out without another word. The war had just begun. If you're still with me, it would mean the world to me if you'd hit that like button and just comment the number 1 down below. That way, I'll know you're here, walking this journey with me. Your support is a huge encouragement, and it truly keeps me going. Just type the number 1, and let's get back to what happened next. The morning after I walked out of that house, I felt like a ghost in my own life. The betrayal was so complete, so all-encompassing, that I didn't know which way to turn. But then I remembered a name I'd heard whispered in business circles for years, Leland Hayes. He was a divorce lawyer with a reputation for being as sharp as a scalpel and as unflinching as stone. He was exactly what I needed. I sat in his mahogany-paneled office, explaining the situation in a numb, detached voice. I told him about the affair, the pregnancy, the threats of a lawsuit. He listened quietly, his face unreadable, until I was finished. Then he leaned forward and asked one question that stopped me cold. "Ms. Wynne," he said, his eyes sharp and intelligent. "Are you sure the betrayal is only happening in your personal life? People who cross boundaries like this in one area of their life often cross them elsewhere. Have you checked your company's finances?" My heart lurched. I hadn't. I had trusted Graham completely with the operational and financial side of the business. The thought that he could betray me there, too, had never even crossed my mind. Within days, Leland assembled a team of forensic auditors. They descended on my company's accounts, combing through years of records that I had trusted Graham to oversee. I tried to work, to keep up appearances with my employees, but I spent most of my days in a conference room with the auditors, watching as they peeled back the layers of my life. The results made my stomach drop to the floor. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a conspiracy. Forged invoices for services that were never rendered. Phantom consulting fees paid to shell companies. Vendor payments that led straight to bank accounts in Chelsea's name. Graham had been siphoning money for months, small amounts at first, then growing bolder over time. Chelsea had been just as complicit. She had padded her expense reports with luxury clothes, spa treatments, even a business trip to Miami that coincided with a music festival. And the final, sickening twist, there were monthly consulting payments going to my parents. They had been getting paid from the company I built with my own sweat and tears, all while knowing their other daughter was sleeping with my husband. They were all in on it. I sat in Leland's office with the evidence spread out before me, my hands trembling. This wasn't just a messy family drama anymore. This is fraud, Leland said, his voice grim. Embezzlement. We're not just fighting a wrongful termination suit anymore, Eleanor. We're going to war with evidence of serious crimes. True to their word, they struck first. The lawsuits were filed within a week: wrongful termination, emotional distress, discrimination against a pregnant woman. Graham even had the audacity to demand alimony, claiming he was instrumental to my company's growth. My parents filed affidavits supporting them, swearing under oath that I was an unstable, jealous sister who had targeted poor, fragile Chelsea out of spite. The first day in court felt like walking into my own execution. Chelsea arrived looking pale and frail, one hand placed permanently on her belly, the perfect image of fragile motherhood. Graham walked beside her, his jaw tight, playing the part of the protective partner. My parents flanked them like bodyguards. Together, they looked like a family. And I, the one who had been betrayed by every single one of them, looked like the villainous outsider. During cross-examination, Chelsea's attorney, a smug man with a condescending sneer, leaned in close. "Ms. Wynne," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Isn't it true that you have always resented your sister's free spirit? Isn't it true that you fired her out of pure jealousy when you discovered she had found happiness with your husband?" "No," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. "I fired her for inappropriate conduct in the workplace and for financial misconduct, which we have documented extensively." On cue, Chelsea burst into tears, a dramatic, heaving sob. "She's trying to make me lose my baby," she cried out, her voice breaking. "The stress she's causing me, it could endanger the pregnancy." The judge called for order, but the theatrics worked. I could see the jury shifting uneasily in their seats, their eyes full of sympathy for the crying, pregnant woman. My stomach churned with a mixture of rage and fear. They were brilliant performers, and their stage was this courtroom. For a terrifying moment, I thought they might actually win. But they had underestimated Leland Hayes. He remained calm, unruffled by their performance. One by one, he began to lay down the evidence, not with anger, but with the cold, precise skill of a surgeon exposing a deep-seated infection. He started with the bank statements, projecting them onto a large screen for the entire court to see. He showed the illegal fund transfers, the payments to shell companies, the direct deposits into Chelsea's and my parents' accounts. Next came the emails between Graham and Chelsea, discussing how to disguise personal expenses as business costs. Then came the authenticated security footage, leaving no doubt about the inappropriate conduct. He presented Chelsea's padded expense reports, highlighting the luxury purchases, a $2,000 handbag, a spa weekend, first-class plane tickets. The jury, who had looked at her with such sympathy before, now eyed her with suspicion. But the dagger, the final, devastating blow, came from Leland's private investigators. First, he proved that the business administration certificate Chelsea had so proudly shown me was a complete forgery, purchased from an online diploma mill. Chelsea's face went white. Then, Leland presented his final finding. The investigators had traced Chelsea's past, uncovering a pattern. 3 different men in another state had filed police reports against her for credit card fraud and theft over the years, only to mysteriously withdraw their complaints a short time later. Leland then presented bank records showing that my parents had quietly paid off each of those men, shielding Chelsea from the consequences of her actions, just as they always had. "This isn't an isolated mistake," Leland told the judge, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. "This is a pattern of calculated deceit, supported and enabled by her family. My client is not the villain here. She is the victim of a long-term, coordinated conspiracy." For the first time, I saw cracks in Graham's armor. He refused to look at me, his jaw clenching and unclenching. Chelsea had stopped crying and was now whispering furiously to her lawyer. And my parents looked smaller than I had ever seen them, shrunken and exposed under the harsh lights of the courtroom. The web of lies they had spun for years was finally, completely, unraveling. The final day in court felt surreal. Every sound seemed amplified, the shuffle of papers, the judge clearing his throat, Chelsea's staged sniffles from 2 rows behind me. When the judge finally began to speak, the entire room held its breath. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented," he said, his voice leaving no room for doubt, "this court rules in favor of the defendant, Ms. Eleanor Wynne." The words struck like thunder. Graham's head dropped into his hands. Chelsea let out a gasp, clutching her stomach as if the verdict itself was a physical blow. My mother muttered, "No, no, this can't be," while my father sat rigid, his face a mask of glassy-eyed rage. The judgment was merciless and swift. All funds siphoned from my company were to be returned, with interest. Due to the severity of the embezzlement and fraud, Graham was sentenced to 3 years in prison. My divorce was finalized, with no alimony awarded. Chelsea received a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation, spared jail time only because she was pregnant. And my parents, while escaping criminal charges, had their bank accounts frozen to repay their share of the stolen money. Their finances were in ruins. As the gavel struck one final time, I felt no triumph. No joy. Just a vast, hollow emptiness. In the weeks that followed, I tried to piece my life back together. I sold the house Graham and I had once shared, its walls felt poisoned with memories. I moved into a smaller condo near my office, a clean slate. At work, I was transparent with my employees, and slowly, we rebuilt the trust that had been shattered. My parents tried to call. Letters arrived, filled with pleas for understanding and forgiveness. I blocked their numbers and returned the mail unopened. Through a mutual acquaintance, I heard that Chelsea had given birth to a boy. That she and Graham had gotten married in the prison visiting room, exchanging vows under fluorescent lights. I heard she and the baby were now living with my parents, the 4 of them struggling to make ends meet in the house I grew up in. Sometimes, late at night, guilt tried to creep in. I would picture a baby with Graham's eyes, innocent of it all. But then I would remember the coldness in their voices when they threatened me, the calculation in Chelsea's tears, and the way my parents chose them over me, every single time. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had destroyed themselves with their own greed and lies. So, I chose not to feel guilty. Instead, I poured myself into rebuilding my company and myself. I joined a trauma support group, where strangers with their own shattered lives taught me the meaning of solidarity. My company expanded, doubling its client base within 2 years. One night, I pulled out an old photograph of Aunt Beatrice and me. We were at a county fair, her arm looped through mine, both of us laughing at something just out of frame. Her voice echoed in my memory, as clear as day. "Trust your instincts, Eleanor. They'll rarely steer you wrong." I should have listened sooner. But I'm listening now. The future feels uncertain, yes, but for the first time, it feels completely and utterly mine. I'm not living in my sister's shadow, or under my parents' judgment, or in the wreckage of a husband's betrayal. I'm standing alone, and I've never felt stronger.